Friends, it's Jeff. It's Around the Circle. We are discussing science and philosophy when it comes to the Enneagram again with Dr. Sam E. Greenberg. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for having me back.
I don't think it's a mistake to broadly characterize my approach to Enneagram as more right brain, artistic, introspective. And to broadly characterize yours as more left brain, empirical, data driven. Does that feel fair?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's going to be a little bit of a distinction for me between personal and researcher.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say personally, I am quite introspective, but yes, professionally, very left-brained, logical, data-driven, and I am, as a human, very left-brained, even when I try not to be.
Well, with that in mind, central to Enneagram discussion is typing people. What does it mean to type people in the sciences? Like, if you were when you come to type, what are you referring to scientifically?
I mean, at the simplest, it's the ability to sort into like an easy to, well, it doesn't have to be easy to understand, but into a construct, like a clean construct, meaning it doesn't overlap with another construct to the point that multiple people can do it. It basically categories. I mean, it's not discrete categories is all I can say for what type would be scientifically.
Seems like there's all sorts of categories all over you'll have to remind me, the DSM.
Yeah.
You say this person fits into this broader construct, this broader pattern.
Yeah.
I mean, that's typing a person, and is it not?
I'd say so.
The tendency to not want to be typed, I assume that there's pushback of a non empirical sort that's much more about, look, I don't want to be pigeonholed in these spaces. But that's in large measure what psychology does, yeah?
I'd say traditional psychology does it, yeah.
Is there movement then?
There's different types of psychology. So if you look at depth psychology or integral psychology or transpersonal psychology, those are all inclusive of the subconscious, often dream states in depth psychology, meditative states, psychedelic states. So much less about just categorizing people based on their behavior and thought patterns, and the acknowledgement that a person is, despite what you believe, sort of a soul. Like there's some aspect of us that's not just our thoughts or our feelings or our body.
I'm very interested in that because it seems to me, getting into Enneagram, and this may be part of the problem, is it is so subjective, introspective in nature at one level, because we talked about this quite a bit. It's a lot of it is self-reporting.
Yeah, and when, the studies on typing others show that people aren't good at it. There's only a few studies on that, but basically people are bad at typing. Even trained experts are pretty bad at typing, and a lot of people do typing, including myself. I like to think I'm good at it, but just typing others is difficult, and typing yourself is difficult.
Creates all sorts of issues for saying definitive things when the input is slippery at that level. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. In philosophy, what makes something worthwhile? Like, if you say the Enneagram is useful from a philosophical standpoint, is that enough that like you think it's useful? How do you assign value in a philosophical realm?
The term useful itself is invoking value. And I think it would be agreed on something like values emerge from human beings. We create values. What is valuable? This piece of cardboard with a picture of Honus Wagner from 1909 is worth $10 million.
What?
But it's it's just a piece of cardboard. So there's the most expensive baseball card
Oh,
is a tobacco card from the early 1900s. People are willing to pay $10 million for that. I have a bunch of pieces of cardboard in my pantry that have like Tony the Tiger on them and Kellogg's and the rest, and I could snip them up and say, "Do you want this for $10 million?" No, it's not from the right period of time, and it doesn't have the right picture on it. But it's just a piece of cardboard. Both these are pieces of cardboard. What makes one more valuable? What makes one more valuable is that we bring a sense of value to the world around us. And this just human beings are value creating creatures. And so usefulness is going to be in that space. There's probably going to be a lot of biology there. There's probably going to be like what are the human needs? We could talk about Maslow for a little bit. It's what counts as useful comes into play at that level. I'm getting off topic. Like, so is the Enneagram useful?
I think you're right on topic, actually.
Does it improve your sex life?
Well, it seems to, yes.
There it is.
At least, at least it decreases the amount of suffering people have in their sexual and intimate lives, as far as we know.
I think it becomes at that level, like does somebody see that it gets them where they want to be, have the experiences they want to have? We can bring in a big topic in philosophy is happiness. And in my view, everything we do aims at happiness.
Mm.
Now we miss happiness all the time through bad choices, but we're aiming at something like what we think of as a inner sense of contentment, thriving, flourishing. And so usefulness would, in my view, like be wrapped up in that. Usefulness as a target is, by the way, it's a philosophy called pragmatism. Something is valuable if it's pragmatic.
There are absolutely so many other ways to glean truth. And I don't know that I feel like that does tie back into the Enneagram because
Mm-hmm.
one of the other arguments I sort of use for it to be treated scientifically, even though people are skeptical, is this idea of face validity, which we were talking about, which is the idea that it appears on its face to be what it is. It appears on its face to, it's often used with measurement, to measure what it's supposed to measure. But in this case, I mean it as the Enneagram appeals to so many people and resonates for so many people as an accurate way of understanding themselves. Now, a lot of people would say, a lot of scientists would say, well, so does astrology, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it doesn't matter. But actually, face validity is a construct in science. It's not the best way of measuring validity, but it is something. It is useful. So, at what point do we sort of, as scientists, like, throw out the entire Enneagram as being not useful because it doesn't have enough construct validity or content validity or these other forms of validity yet because we haven't studied it that much yet, when it has more face validity than a lot of the other personality typing systems that have been studied. The one that they often talk about, the big five, that
Mm-hmm.
it's five different types of traits, that has a lot of scientific validity for it, but it doesn't have as much just personal resonance for people. The idea of like, oh, are you conscientious or not? People are just like, eh. But the Enneagram is really changing lives and it really does resonate. So I feel like from philosophy's standpoint, that matters. And from science's standpoint, it matters a little bit, but much less than other things. What do you think
Yep.
about all that?
I think face validity gives you a lot of reason, energy, passion for pursuing certain ideas as being valuable at the levels that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That comes out of the human being who says, I think this is worthy of my time, interest, dedication of resources towards exploring. Like all of that again is values. But the thing at the scientific, when we talk about scientific theory, many people will want to say that theories are proven, and they're not. Theories are never proven, they are always assumed. Theories can be disproven through anomalies. But like at the foundational level, you're just saying, look, this is the story I believe about reality. And when I employ this theory, when I employ this set of glasses, it makes sense of my experience.
In any study, you don't ever prove your hypothesis.
Yeah.
You simply reject not the hypothesis. You reject the idea that it's it's disproven. So you reject disproving it, but you never prove it. And that's true in
Yes.
every scientific study that's ever been done on anything. So that's again when we have the kind of blind worship of science, you know, the belief
Yeah.
science. It's like science is an ever evolving animal, is basically alive with, you know, constantly moving and changing, and you can believe in the scientific consensus of the moment, but that's all you're
Yeah.
believing in.
Yep. Which, bringing this back to Enneagram, this is routinely what I say to people who I debate with on this front is like, the Enneagram's been disproven. You where? Like, what are you pointing at? I've seen nothing that would go down that path, with the exception of what seems to be confusion around typing, and that typing can be very, very tricky. And like, I would just want to jump on board and say, yeah, you were exactly right. Do
What do
you
you
have thoughts on that?
think the very anti people that you are talking about here, that you debate, the very like Enneagram is pseudoscience people, what is the motivation? Because I often find them to be really like intense and angry, and I don't understand why. Like I understand being, you know, to take the astrology example again. Like astrology's fun, but it's you know, there's obviously very little science behind it in terms of, just that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just, it's not shown a lot through scientific lens. But if I say, "Oh, like that's cool. I'm not really into that." I'm not angry. So why
Yeah.
are, you know, why do you think the Enneagram skeptic community, if you will, is so intense?
There's an excellent meta level to this that you're asking me about motivation when it comes to the skeptic. And so I can just, well, Enneagram says about motive X, Y, and Z. And
Do
like,
it.
so many of the folks that seem to push back, the reason they push back is absolutely predictable given their type.
Yes.
So the last guy that I talked to about this, like I wanted to say, look, here's the thing. You typed as a 5. I think that's entirely right. I could have told you your top 5 arguments coming into this debate beforehand, because I know what your motivation is, and I know what really gets you animated and what scratches your itch and what doesn't. And that in and of itself is a great argument for the Enneagram, that your critique of the Enneagram is predictable.
I love that so much. I was going to say it's so many fives. I'm actually
Yeah.
curious, and we probably have time. I'm curious what those different types, like, tell me your experience with their kind of top arguments.
Yeah. The one skeptics are generally coming from a religious position,
Hmm.
and they already have a framework for understanding the world, and it's clearly false. It's got a satanic
It's
symbol.
too
You know,
mystical. Yeah.
that would be the argument. It's too mystical.
Hmm.
You know, have or they there are a lot of ones and threes, some and sevens will often want to pull in the history of the Enneagram and say, well, this guy in South America apparently was having these mystical experiences and writing them down, and that's where the Enneagram came from. And so clearly, construction by demons. And you're like, okay, well, let's talk about that. You know, is that how we judge psychological theories? Is their origin
It's a
points?
great question.
A lot of fours might push back hard because, again, box don't want to be judged on that front, and that would be the primary reason that they're pushing back in a lot of their language. Eights don't want to be controlled sometimes in that same kind of way, and will be aggressive about.
Okay.
So some of the things that
What about for fives?
the fives out there are just saying, you know, where's the data? I'm already skeptical about psychology, says the 5.
Yeah.
but even more so, something that just doesn't have any of the research.
And I
And
think,
then as you've said, like, oh, well, I'll point you to the research.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
sort of. I mean, it's burgeoning, but for fives, it's we really struggle to accept that there are ways of knowing or understanding or truth that are not even accessible through the brain, that you in fact have to go past beyond the brain to even access them. Fives
Yeah.
are really bad with that. So the idea that the Enneagram is an intuitive or, spiritually resonant truth is a really big stretch. So I think, I mean, that's one of the reasons it's important to keep building the science, is because people will come to it through that arena. But yes, fives gave me the hardest time when I was doing my study and was trying to recruit people.
It's likewise the case, is it not, that you are bringing up a sphere of knowledge that they may not be very invested in or very competent in? And that in and of itself will be an obstacle to engagement and elevation, of potential validity. Just saying, look, I'm uncomfortable. I don't want, like, the five may say, I like may not want to talk about that, but just being ignorant in the best sense, like you just don't know,
Yeah,
is going to be an obstacle for a lot of fives. Yeah.
I would think so. And that we have this idea that we can be an expert on anything. It's a really false idea. Like, we kind of think, like, if I just read enough books about brain surgery, like I could just be as good as that guy. And it's just not true. But we do think it. So we don't revere experts at all. We consider ourselves to be the experts on everything. Oh my God, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds absolutely so hubristic. I can't even stand myself right now. And so, with the Enneagram, I think fives come to it and they're like, oh, this Enneagram thing, I'm going to do some research. And then they do some research. Well, one of the things about the Enneagram that I found is that it's like a skill set to differentiate good content from bad content on the Enneagram.
Correct.
And one of the sort of almost services I offer clients is saying, like, here's the really good stuff and here's how to find it. And if you just start Googling and chat GPTing shit, it's not actually that good.
Yeah.
People don't like to hear that. Fives especially don't like to hear that, because it's like, well, all knowledge is at my fingertips. I should be able to just become an expert myself. And it's actually quite difficult to do that quickly. And I think, all of that stuff comes up for fives when they're introduced.
You'll notice the value judgments coming in. Here's good research. Here's bad research,
Yes.
and elevating what is worthy of our time and energies.
What
That's a
is
philosophical
worthy of
question.
our time and energies? That was another thing that came up in our last conversation, is what constitutes evidence. You said what constitutes evidence is a philosophical question, not a scientific question. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah. If you're making a pitch for Enneagram itself, I think quite valuable, the sort of stuff that you would want to say just experientially. I've worked with 1,000 couples. This is the fruit of using this as a tool in their relationships. That seems to me to constitute strong, at least something that is of value in terms of, I mean, you talked, that's face validity, is it not? Or is that something more?
It's a type of data, but it's the kind of data that people, well, you would call it like case studies. It's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of data that a lot of books are written about, but that's, depending on your methodology, might not stand up very well.
Right.
It just depends. So that would be kind of like anecdotal data from a single practitioner wouldn't be enough in a scientific sense.
But I mean, you got a large number of people that you've worked with.
Sort of. Yeah. I mean, me personally, in terms of coaching, I have
Yeah.
many, many more people who participated in the study that I conducted, which was scientifically sound methodology,
Oh, I
as
see
much
what you
as
mean.
you can be for Enneagram work. That I think, someone from the scientific community looking at my research would find that more compelling than talking to me as a coach saying that I've personally seen transformation.
Let me go a different road on this. It seems to me that the idea that I'm gonna solve my problems at work by talking with somebody about my relationship with my mom is ridiculous. On the face of it, that seems like a ridiculous claim, and yet apparently that's been a huge part of healthy psychology, is just getting a sense of your relationship with your parents and how that influenced you.
Is that a
That seems to
question?
me almost, well, it seems to me almost identical to like how one might think about Enneagram and what constitutes knowledge. You come in and you say, look, we're looking for patterns in terms of what motivates human beings. I think that there's generally 9 big patterns about motive. Talking about this and how it influences us ends up being something that's very difficult to systematize. And yet, when it's employed in lots of different contexts, for example, your sex life, the tool does work. That seems to me, so what counts as knowledge? It may not, that at least counts as something approaching practical wisdom, or something that would you could say this isn't useless.
And again, that's what a huge percentage of the existing research on the Enneagram does. It's saying people used it, now their lives are better. And it's quite compelling. And I'm not sure why the scientific community doesn't think that in itself is compelling enough to support more research on it. But there's very little, in terms of, the scientific perspective, there's very little research on the Enneagram, period. There's, off the top of my head, I think less than 100 published studies on it.
Mm-hmm,
Or
mm-hmm.
if it's more, maybe now, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. It's not a lot. So maybe the scientific community looks at that and just doesn't, it's just not enough. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it having notable impacts on people's lives is some type of evidence.
Yep. And even, I suppose, as we're saying it, like even valuing the opinion of the scientific community outside of any study or evidence is itself a value judgment. And you kind of say, well, where is this scientific community? Can you point to the things that the scientific community, when they got together and collectively, what, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people all put their opinions into the same hat and said, no, this is what we say? That didn't happen. You're making assumptions, and you're making assumptions, and it's disingenuous.
I've had to go off on such a long rant, but there's
Do it.
there's so many conclusions from science that people do not want to hear.
Right.
So they just ignore them. And
Mm-hmm.
then they're saying like the scientific consensus. Well, the scientific consensus on, let's say, just like your standard pharmaceutical, like ibuprofen, those studies, they can cut all the outliers out. They only
Mm-hmm.
need something like a 5% effectiveness rate to say it's effective. So everyone assumes that, like, I'm not picking on ibuprofen specifically, I have no idea, but everyone assumes that that's a useful drug because the science says so. But actually, the science is taking all kinds of weird shortcuts. There's weird money stuff going on. Science is subject to the same biases that everything else in the world is. So a lot of people think that statistics, statistical studies, that that's objective. But when you run a statistical model, you as a scientist decide what you think is relevant when you run that model. And all of that is assumptions. And all of that is the bias of the researcher built in. So it's actually much more an art than people think. And the scientific consensus is a real thing in terms of, like, right now, the scientific consensus on X topic is this. Like, you can find that out, but
True.
that doesn't mean that there aren't dissenting studies that say different things. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to change a lot in 10 years. Like, you see this a lot with the parenting and child research. The scientific consensus on pacifiers, for example, I'm trying to pick the least controversial one of these, that was very anti-pacifier in, I think, the 90s, and now it's very pro-pacifier. Like, it just completely flips.
Mm.
really frequently, like every 15, 20 years. So scientific consensus is real, but it's just not reliable.
The Just because there's scientific consensus that the Earth revolves around the sun doesn't mean that there's scientific consensus on every possible imaginable scientific question.
Correct. Correct.
I want to flip back to the idea of the professional self and personal self. This is something that you brought up in our email together, and I just thought the distinction was really valuable, and it may really build on and land the plane for us in this conversation. I assume there's a tension between like research mode thinking and your lived interior experience, and that's worth naming, talking about. And I don't know when you see that distinction, what comes to your mind?
I don't feel tension. They often talk about fives being very excellent compartmentalizers, and I don't
Mm,
relate to that very much on its face. I'm sexual five, so maybe that's different a little bit because the sexual instinct is not at all a compartmentalizing instinct. However, when it comes to things like you're asking about now, like my internal world versus my external world, they're related enough because I'm lucky enough to be living, or doing a career that's really close to my passion. So my internal world and my external career world are similar. I feel no tension really between them. It's just that if I were asked a question by someone at a workshop or a talk, I would answer it through the best of my ability, which is going to be my scientific knowledge and then my clinical knowledge. So it would be something like, here's what the limited science says about this, and then here's my personal experience as a therapeutic coach. And if I'm working with Lindsay, who's a sex therapist, a licensed therapist, she would say, her clinical experience as a licensed professional. If I were asking myself the same question, the methods I would use to infer data or wisdom would be more varied. I still always actually look at the scientific consensus on almost anything that I'm thinking about, from what product to use to like everything. But that's not at all anymore my only way of discerning information. And I wouldn't just look at that and look at my coaching experience and how I've seen other people heal or anything like that. I would also, divining sort of spiritual wisdom for myself. But I can't do that for someone else, well, unless they ask me to specifically.
right.
So I just think I do not feel a tension between them. I just feel that they're different.
That's an excellent answer. I feel like that just showcases wisdom and competence and understanding that you can say, look, here's the external world and what's arguably verifiable, what's been put through all of the checks, and what can be said with some authority.
Yeah.
But that's not the entirety of the human experience. And this is how I come to the world in places that may not be testable, things that I see as valuable, and what strikes me as intuitively true and worthy. Those are two different spheres, and both those spheres, it seems to me, like in my experience, I think those are very valuable spheres. And I actually want to hear from people on the latter. Like I want to hear your intuitive gut on some of this, and let's see where that goes. Are you a fan of The Pit? Did you watch The Pit?
No.
It's a medical drama, like emergency room in Pittsburgh, and they're having this conversation about when it comes to medicine and how to deal with somebody in crisis, medical crisis. Like sometimes the surgeon needs to trust their gut on what the best course is. You have a deeply problematic situation, and there's three different options. How do you move forward in that space? It's interesting. Anyway.
I love that because medicine in the modern era has become one of those things that people consider to be purely science.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear about things like the attitude of the doctor or the surgeon that day having a huge impact, or the, you know, the feeling state of the different people, or the intuition. And it's none of these things seem to be able to exist in a vacuum.
We are presently just 2 blocks away. They're building a huge research building for, I forget the name of the medicine, but it's in essence, it's non-pharmaceutical medicine. Like, I'm a huge advocate for drugs that do the job, and and like on a secondary front or in balance, there's so much to be said for your diet, your exercise patterns, your mental states that may do vastly more than a pill.
We also have a lot of cultural hegemony around our way of doing medicine in the West,
Mm.
when we have Eastern cultures such as China that have
Mm-hmm.
thousands and thousands and thousands of years of developing a certain perspective on medicine that
Mm-hmm.
Western culture just totally rejects. So the idea of, we're like just on a random topic now, but the idea of complementary medicine is that you can try those things as well. You have all the wisdom of the world at your fingertips, and the idea that you should just go take a pill or see a surgeon, and that like your holistic mental health doesn't matter, and that these other ways of approaching it, maybe herbally or whatever, don't matter. Just doing people a disservice, I think.
That strikes me as case in point here in terms of, we started with, is the Enneagram useful? And the target is, for me, is happiness. But another way to say that is, are you internally healthy, whole, thriving, flourishing?
And if I want to put a neat little bow on this, philosophy and science are inseparable. I think that's what we're seeing.
Exactly right. Naming our biases when we come to that. That's what Enneagram is, and why it's valuable actually in this. It's not just do the sciences end up proving the Enneagram. It's actually bigger than that. It's worth asking what the motivation of those doing the studies is, and studying that. For me, it's a very meta level engagement of like, I really want to know why you are cranked up about doing X, Y, and Z. Do you want to sell back pain medication? You know, and is that where your research funding is coming from? Is like an obvious like scapegoat. Is why the university, the independent university, the not-for-profit university is so important and valuable. Like, if you commoditize everything in our culture, we get really bad results. So,
Great.
blah blah.
That's a great point.
See, all my opinions, Sam, out on the table.
I like
Let me
it.
tell you what else I think about our world right now. Sam, it's great having you as always. It's a delight and treasure to have you in conversation. So
Yeah.
I'll look forward to our next engagement. See if this spurs anything in us moving forward.
Yeah, hope to talk to you again.
Where can they find you before you sign off?
I am on Instagram at Enneagasm, ENNEA_GASM. I do mostly talk about sex, but also relationships, both as they overlap with the Enneagram, and my website's at EnneagramSexpert.com.
Love having you. Look forward to next time.
Talk to you soon.